So the gravitropism, there's been a lot of debate over the years of how plants perceive gravity. They're starting to come to a consensus that it's partly due to the special amyloplasts that are in the root tissue. So in each cell of the root, we tend to see a lot of amyloplasts because roots are really good at storing starch, which that's what amyloplasts do. And so, like right now, all the trees on campus have a bunch of starch in their roots that they've taken from their leaves and packed for storage over winter into their root tissue. So those so-called statoliths, they're just amyloplasts, and they are there pressing against, if the root is growing straight down, it's pressing down on the cell membrane, of each cell closest to the bottom, I guess, the bottom of each cell. And that pressure on that part of the cell membrane is giving the signal gravity is that way, keep going that way, and growing straight down. And so, on the other hand, plant shoots and leaves want to grow away from gravity, so they do just the opposite. It's called negative gravitropism because they're growing away from the force of gravity, which makes sense. They don't want to grow into most stem tissue is above ground, not below ground. Hormones are involved in that. And so part of it is auxin getting redistributed in the root tissue. So if a root is growing straight down, which is the top root that you're looking at, so you see it's growing straight down, and they're trying to show those amyloplasts or the statoliths right there, pressing on that part of the membrane. And then you see indoleacetic acid or auxin is coming down the root tissue, and then they call it the fountain effect. It comes down and then comes back up. And so that's the trend straight down, evenly go right back up at the root tip. And that, along with the statoliths, is the so far that's what they're figuring out are the signals that the plant is using to detect the force of gravity, which direction. Now, if you lay a root horizontal to the ground, so it's horizontal to the force of gravity, they actually see that auxin will get distributed asymmetrically on root tissue, where you start to see the thicker arrow here that the artist has drawn is trying to show that there's more auxin on the bottom side of the root as it's horizontal, and less auxin on the top side of the root. And that asymmetrical concentration actually in root tissue, it tells the lower cells to slow down, tells the upper cells, speed up, speed up, speed up. And when they speed up, they start to outgrow the bottom side, and that allows for the curving down. And so it's a little odd because auxin stimulates growth in shoot tissue. But here we're actually seeing a little bit of a difference where you see higher amounts of auxin that's slowing down growth, and smaller amounts of auxin. So this is another example I wanted to point out with regard to hormones, is that sometimes what you see happening in the shoot and leaves with regard to hormones can be almost the opposite of how it will work in the root tissue. And so just be aware of that. I'm not going to get into the details, but this is just a nice example as we're talking about gravitropism, that auxins tend to have, when you see high levels of auxin in the root, it actually slows down root growth instead of speeding it up like it does in the shoots. So usually when we talk about auxins, most scientists will say, well, yeah, it speeds up. So yes, in the shoots, certainly, yeah. In the roots, not so much. Okay, so just be aware of that. And again, when a plant spends its life in two different worlds, essentially, right? Because they're partly above ground and partly below ground. So if you think about it, it kind of makes sense that there might be some differences on how hormones will be used in those two different body parts. Here's another one, thigmo. Thigmotropism. Thigmo is touch. Thigmotropism. So this is the idea that probably the best example is being shown here where you have vining plants that are extending their shoot tip, and they're trying to find some kind of support that they can wrap around. So once they, pea tendrils are really good at that, pea plants. If you grow peas, they have those tendrils that they will eventually hopefully find something, whether it's a stake that you put into the garden for them, and then they'll start wrapping and growing around that. And as they're doing that, so part of their stem tissue is touching the support and the other part isn't. And that can make a big difference. It sends the signal to the stem, oh, okay, this is a support that I can start wrapping from. And so as they make that physical contact with the stake in your garden, the part of the stem that's touching the stake will slow down its growth. And then the part that's not touching the stake speeds up its growth. And that allows for that coiling action around the stake next to your pea plant. And so that, again, it's an asymmetrical growth due to touch. In this case, the pea tendril touching the stake in your garden. And so growing peas or pretty much any vining plant, you will see that behavior where it is a sigmotropism. So it's a growth response, and again, asymmetrical growth to allow for that coiling action around the stake that's in your garden. Here's another picture. So plants have touch receptors all over their body. And so way more than initially hypothesized, we see them all over. And so the idea here of that touching is causing that behavior to go ahead and coil. And, it's a good response. The plant is finding a way to stay elevated, is fighting gravity by latching onto that support and growing. Here's another idea. Seismonasty. Seismic graphs and seismometers. What do you think about when I talk about seismic? Earthquakes, right? And so that's why they named it earthquakes. So this is the idea that if you disturb a plant in some way, and it's often with a plant they have to have a contact with something, but it's a disturbance, usually a quick disturbance, that you can get a response by the plant that can be quite dramatic. And so here you're looking at the top image is Mimosa pudica, which is a scientific name for the plant that's often nicknamed the sensitive plant or the shy plant. And so when you touch its leaflets, it will quickly, so you see a finger, person's touching the leaflets here, and you start to see the leaflets are folding up to each other. And so it can be really, really quick. You touch and immediately get that response of the leaflets folding up. And then eventually that whole leaf, so this whole thing, and it'll fold, all of the leaflets will fold up, and then the petiole will kind of cause a movement downward. And so super dramatic. What's the image on the left, lower left? What's that one? What plant, do you know? Yeah, Venus flytrap. Awesome, amazing plant. So Charles Darwin was super interested in these types of plants. He studied them for quite a while, looking at how they quickly respond. In this case, the poor hapless fly is caught in those modified trap leaves and is going to get digested from the outside in by the plant. What's the one on the lower right? Sundew. We have those around here as well. Sundew plants, they do grow in boggy areas here, but they're really hard to spot because they're very petite plants. So if you spot one, good on you, because they're tough. You got to kind of get your nose down there and really look for them. But they're so nice to look at, especially in the bright sunshine with the sun bouncing off those droplets. And so those droplets are very attractive to insects. They'll come along and they'll try to drink or eat that, and they get caught in the stickiness of it. And then the whole leaf will start to bend around and capture the poor hapless fly and start digesting it from the outside. And so the plant starts releasing enzymes and breaks down. the insect. Why do you think it's eating insects? Yeah.
Because it's for
Boggy areas in general where you find Venus flytrap and sundew. Boggy areas tend to be deficient in nitrogen, and plants need a lot of nitrogen. Insects, especially their exoskeleton, have a lot of nitrogen. Chitins is very heavy nitrogen. So from that perspective, that's a really good trick for the plant to have in those types of habitats. So does that mean if you go and buy a Venus flytrap from a local flower shop that you have to capture insects and feed it? What do you think? No, because usually they'll provide the soil, the plant will be in a pot that you buy, and the soil has enough nitrogen now. So if you go to buy one of these plants, don't feel like you have to feed it insects. You can if you want. I used to do it when my boys were little, when they were toddlers. We'd go hunting for flies, and we had a cat. And for some reason, our house, at some points of the year, we'd get a fair dose of flies in our house. So the cat would help us hunt the flies. He'd usually stun the fly. He wouldn't eat it. And then I'd try to shoo the cat away and pick up the fly, drop it. What you'll do for your kids. Boys love it. They're like, yeah, let's feed the plants. So it can be quite entertaining. Have the right attitude. Yeah, if there's enough nitrogen, they may not engage in this behavior because it can be it's there's an energy cost to it, so they may not. Um, but the way I don't repot my plants as much as I should, so probably by the time I'm hunting flies with my boys, the soil that I had it in was probably getting deficient, and so it definitely um, did the dramatic behavior, which I was hoping for, and I wanted my boys to see that. I was trying to brainwash my boys to get into botany. Hasn't really happened yet. Not yet, but I keep working. But so yeah, nitrogen deficient areas, that will be a good strategy. And then has anyone had any fun with mimosa, the sensitive plant? You can buy those seeds. It's really easy to grow, by the way. It's you don't have to have a green thumb, so to speak. It's pretty easy to grow. Forms these cute purple pom pom flowers. The only thing I caution you, it's super fun to do this. Move like that. Just don't do it all the time. It's an energy cost, and so you're gonna wear out your plant. You won't kill it probably, but it usually takes about I don't know half hour to unfurl again. And so don't like immediately keep hitting it with touch because it's a cost.
What is its function for being so sensitive? The other two
Yeah, I know. Right, because it's not like we talked about an insect getting caught, right? So let me show you this and let's think about that question. So here is a ditch next to like a watery ditch area next to a road down in it grows in um like the equator and south of the equator. I think that's its native range. And here you see a field of a mixed, there's some mimosa in here as well as some other plants. Now let me show the same section, same patch after they went through and disturbed that whole area and the mimosa collapsed. So you can still see the pom-poms, but you can't really see the leaves anymore, right? And so, I mean, look at how dramatically they can close up. So there's a really good, and I can't find it. So if anyone finds this, if you could send it my way. I've been looking for the video. There's a video. I think it's a Sir David Attenborough video clip that shows a fly landing on the leaves, and then the leaves do that. They or a beetle. I think it was a beetle, and the leaves folded up so quickly, and then the whole thing tipped down that the beetle went tumbling off. And you swear that beetle kind of was like shaking its head. What the heck just happened? Because it was so fast. And then they showed the beetle walking off. And so it makes you think maybe they're doing that to kind of surprise and scare away rather than eat. They're using it as a like get away from me, and they do it so fast that it's kind of like whoa, it was so funny. I laughed when I saw the clip. 'Cause they, anthropomorphically, it looked like the beetle was confused. Yeah, right? Why don't they all do that? I know, right? Because plants get attacked left and right by all kinds of things. And I think when you're diminutive, this is a pretty small plant. I think when you're small and low to the ground, maybe you get way more insect visitors like beetles crawling around on you. Maybe in that case, it's worth it. But if you're a bigger plant, perhaps there's other strategies that are less costly to do. And so, like most plants are super good at producing all kinds of chemicals to make organisms that are attacking the plant move on, either because it tastes bad, poisonous, and so you have a lot of chemicals plants will produce. But, as we know, there's a lot of plants that can't, in the end, they succumb to whatever's attacking them. But yeah, I think a lot of it's just driven by their native habitat. Like what area of the world did they evolve initially? And what kind of selection pressures did they have in their habitat to make them have these behaviors? And so it's a really good question because it does make you think, why don't all plants do this? And it usually comes down to what's their native habitat, what did they evolve experiencing, and then they maintain those behaviors through the generation. So yeah, real fun to think about. If you want to see, there's videos. These should be active links. You can see the nature of it in video format. Same with the Venus flytrap. And so this is fun to study, and it's very eye-catching. So go ahead and watch some of these video clips. They can be quite entertaining. This one, the video clip of them that's posted here, I have in the notes section. Watch all the way to the very, very end, because there's something at the end that's really funny. So watch it all the way to the end. See if you can see what's going on there. But beautiful anatomy to the sundew leaves. You can imagine if with the sun striking that, I mean, it's eye-catching. That's usually when I go hunting for sundew plants is on a sunny day, because I know it's going to be easier to spot with the sun glistening off those droplets. So lots of fun to think about. Those are trichomes. Yep, very good. Those are trichomes. And then they are kind of, my guess is the glandular trichomes, because they do produce and exude that sticky, I think it's partly sugared, mostly sugar, probably sugar water, to attract them to come along and eat it, and they unwittingly get stuck. It's sticky enough. Okay, here's another one. So Thigmomorphogenesis is a mouthful, but if you dissect the word, it makes sense. Thigmo is touch. Morpho is the shape of something, in this case, the plant. Genesis is to create. So what they're saying is it's going to alter its morphology, create a morphology based on touch. And you can do this with your own plant. I do this regularly. So you're looking at two plants that were identical initially in two separate pots there. And the left one, they touched on a regular basis. The right one, they left untouched. And so what I mean is they just came up to the leaves and stem and brushed with their hands, disturbed it gently. And they did that 2 times a day, I think, was in this particular case. And what they see, of course, is a dramatic shift in its morphology. So instead of growing tall as the untouched, it stayed short and stocky. And so I do this a lot with some of my plants at home, because I don't have great sunlight coming in my windows. I don't have great exposures. My southern exposure is non-existent. So my plants tend to get leggy, which I don't always want. And so I'll try to slow that process down by disturbing them. And I caught on to this. It reminded me one summer I bought 2 identical plants. I put one outside on my porch and the other in an internal room that didn't have any untouched, they're not even significant airflow. And so huge difference, because the one out on the porch, I didn't really touch that one either, but the wind was touching it all the time. And you could see it how it stayed much shorter and stockier, and the one in my house grew very big, tall. And so that was a real good reminder to me. Oh yeah, I should be doing that with some of my leggier plants. So this is something that you can see sometimes if you're out hiking and pay attention, especially to smaller herbaceous plants that grow in one season and die off. And you walk along like a deer path or something, an animal path that's heavily traveled. And if you can see plants along the path and then the same plant further out, you can usually tell that this is an active deer path by looking at the differences in the plants right along the path. You can find that same species a little further out and it looks taller here. Chances are that's an active deer path. So if you're a hunter, that might be something to pay attention to see if you have an active area of animal traffic in that region. So thigmomorphogenesis, a mouthful, but if you dissect the word, it's pretty good definition. Especially the herbaceous ones that are more sensitive to touch. Yeah. I laugh because when I was young, my grandfather lived, we'd go visit him a lot. I grew up here in the UP and he lived in the Western UP, and he had a neighbor that was, I didn't know it at the time. I figured it out later as I got older, but his neighbor was kind of a hothead and he'd get angry a lot, but at least he had the wherewithal to go outside with a baseball bat and beat on the tree trunk. So he would like hit the tree trunk and cuss and swear in a different Finnish, in the Finnish language. So I learned some interesting Finnish words when I was little. And I would often see, I'd be climbing trees, and so he didn't know I was there. He wouldn't have done that if he saw, a little kid there. But I was hidden away in a tree. Came out, he would do that enough times. It's like, okay, that's a thing with him apparently. And so when I started learning about this, I can't help but think of that, because I wonder, it's like, I should have been measuring that tree. I bet it's shorter and stockier. Every once in a while I'll drive by that area. Still kind of, would they yell at me if I creeped into their backyard? I often wonder what happened to that tree. My guess is it probably was a little bit shorter. It was a young, I think it was a young maple tree. So I guess, if you're going to hit something, better that. But all right. So trigger movements, don't forget about those now. So like with the really rapid movements with the Venus flytrap, sundew, part of that's really a trigger movement process, and it makes sense because if you think about it, rushing water into one part of your body, draining water quickly out of another, it can allow for some nice quick movements, and that's what we see with the those really rapid things that we can see very easily with our time frames. And so often what you'll see if you dissect those plants and look carefully, they'll have special areas of tissue that they've named pulvini for plural, or pulvinus, US on the end for singular. So that's just a fancy word. Pulvini is just a fancy word for a region of tissue that is going to get this turgor pressure shifting going on. And often what we see is that either at the base of the leaf or at the petiole region, which is the little, leaf stalk, that's where you're going to see the pulvini tissue. And so with most of the plants, it's at the base that they have pulvini. And so again, it's just a fancy word to describe that region that's going to get that turgor shift, the water pressure shifting going on to allow for that movement, that really rapid movement. And so if plants need to move rapidly, it's turgor pressure. If they want to move in a more languid way, just slow and steady, growth movements are usually what you think about. Okay. So again, here is an image trying to show the tissue, the pulvinous tissue at the base of each leaflet. And they're just trying to show that there's going to be gain of water on one side, loss of water on the other, and that's causing the movement on the leaflet. And so pretty easy way to do it. just doing that shifting of water, not too bad. And they can reverse it. You know, like I said, once you stop touching the mimosa, it will slowly, it takes a while, immediately flop back to its normal state. It takes a while, usually a half hour to 45 minutes. Flowers can do this too. It's not super common, but you can see, I'll show you this image, and you can see in the center of the flowers, the female portion, and that area right there that I circled, that's called the stigma. That's where the pollen grains are going to land. So if you're a flower and you're good to go, you're a female flower, and you're like, okay, I'm ready to be pollinated, have your stigma open like that so you can catch a bunch of pollen grains. But then once you've been pollinated, what tends to happen is the flower is going to kind of, parts of it can seal up to kind of protect the pollen grains. In this case, what this does, it doesn't really seal up as so much as collapse together, kind of like the leaflets on the mimosa. And so you can see the stigma has kind of folded up on itself to protect the pollen grains, make sure that, because inside the pollen grains is sperm, and so they want the sperm to get to the egg in the center of the flower. So you go from, open, ready to be pollinated to, okay, now I need to do, the second phase, which is to get the sperm to the egg, let that happen. So protect that by folding up like that. So it's not super common, but you do see some flowers exhibit that behavior as well. Here's another one on the day-night rhythm. Nyctinasty is referring to a sleep rhythm of movement. So this is often they talk about this plant. Its nickname is the prayer plant because during the day, its leaves are what you see in the top image, relatively horizontal to the ground. And then at night, the leaves of the prayer plant will fold up to, hands in a prayer position. So they call it the prayer. I bought one and I would sneak out when it was dark in the living room and it never did pray. So I had an atheist plant or a mutant plant. I don't know. It's like, you gave me a bum plant. It's not working because I wanted to use it, for teaching and I could never get it. You have to do it in the dark. You can't go on in. I knew that. Like, don't flip on the lights all the time and look at it. And yeah, I get up at 2 a.m. and look at it. It's like, geez, it's still not doing it. So I don't know. There must have been enough chinks of light in the room somewhere. No idea, but it was rather disappointing. But it is a trigger that is causing that. So maybe that plant just decided it's not worth doing. It was doing okay without it. I got tricked by this one time when I was in the greenhouse over break a few years ago. And on the research side, there was a research project going on with kidney beans. And I said, while the students were on break, they wanted to wrap it up, right after break. It must have been Thanksgiving break. They had to wrap up the research. And I said, well, I'll water those plants for you. So I came in and it was already dark out because, it gets dark early in the winter. And I saw all the leaves doing what's being shown on the right, that drooping down. So sometimes the Nyctinasty, they don't fold up, they droop down. Oh no, they're wilting. They're going to be dead. They're devoid of water. Oh no. And then I looked, oh, the pots are moist if they're not that dehydrated, barely dehydrated. And then I remember they're doing their Nyctinasty response. So beans, I can see do that. If you want to do that. It seems to be a day-night with a lot of plants. And but then it's like, why? Why would they do that? What's the point? And one, especially in the greenhouse, this became a little bit more obvious to me rather than my potted plant at my house. Because the greenhouse, there was a bunch of plants that time in the midnight. And at night, it was cooling down, but it wasn't cold in there, but it was humid. And the hypothesis is that if you can imagine, maybe not so much a green, well, no. If you can imagine like out in the woods, what if there was a rainfall at night? And then all the leaves are horizontal, so all the rain, all the water is staying on the leaf at night. It's promoting fungal growth, like the bad fungi, like mold. And so they think this tilting down in this case, or folding up, I guess, is a way to drain off the water and minimize mold risk. I mean, to me, that makes sense. Yeah, but during the day with the sunlight and the hotter temps, it seems to be less of a risk. Yeah. Can flowers do this, you mean? Or, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, my, oh, what plant was that? Yes, thank you. Morning glory. Yeah, my morning glories. And then I had my passion flower. But has anyone grown a passion flower? It's a vining plant. That one didn't so much do it at night. That one, if you buy a passion flower plant, when it flowers, get your camera out because it lasts for like 24 hours and then it is done. It'll fold up and then it's done. It will never unfold. And so one of the most gorgeous, intricate flowers I've ever seen. But it only lasts like for 24 hours. But yeah, flowers can do that too. But yeah, and morning glory will come back open, right? The next time. I don't think that's the end of its life cycle.
I know that they close up like this.
Yeah. Yeah, and well, if it's not a day-night rhythm, technically it's not nyctinasty, but it's still a turgor movement that's allowing for that behavior. And something else I was gonna say about it went out of my head. It'll come back to me. One other movement that I wanted to mention is solar tracking. Often it's called heliotropism, solar tracking. And if you've ever had the fun time of driving by a sunflower field, there was a sunflower growers field downstate when I was driving by, and it was so cool to see all the sunflowers facing the same direction. And so they're famous for this, of tracking the sun. So as sun comes up in the west, so that's the blackboard is north, south, west, east. So the sun would come up in the east, right? And the sunflowers face that. And then as you see the sun arcing across the sky, they will pivot their leaves, and in this case, their whole flower head, to face the sun as much as possible. And again, they're doing it to try to be 90 degrees, their leaves 90 degrees to the incoming sun. And there's even plants that they say can tell time and they'll anticipate sunrise. And so this was an experiment that was done where they did it artificially with a light, but they were training a plant to, okay, have unidirectional light like sunrise, so the far left, and then they kept moving the light and the leaves would track, and then the shaded one kept the plant dark, and then they witnessed it in the early morning hours, right before sunlight. They witnessed it moving itself to face. And so this was a controlled experiment, but you can see a lot of plants will do this. They will add toward the end of the night, they'll shift and face east. And if you think about it, that's pretty cool because that means as soon as the sun comes up, they're ready. They're ready to start doing photosynthesis. And so it's very efficient for them to be able to tell time and get ready for the sun to come up. So quite amazing. And then here, sometimes if you're walking out in a field of grasses, and I've noticed this, and at first I'm like, what's going on? So when they roll up like that, the leaves roll up. Grasses tend to do that under drought conditions in particular. And so what they're trying to do is just try to minimize their surface area to prevent any wayward water loss out of their leaf tissue. And so if you have ever walked through a field, you're out hiking around and notice that, it's probably a good sign that that area hasn't received rain in a fair bit. So that again is a turtle. Why don't we try a iClicker thingy? Why don't we try that? Let's just see if we can